Forget everything you think you know about the founding of Louisiana. The story isn't about noble pioneers in buckskin hats planting flags along the Mississippi. The real story is far messier, far darker, and way more interesting. It's a story of a colony built not by choice but by force, populated by thieves, debtors, runaways, and women the French government literally labeled as undesirable. To understand how this happened, we have to go back to the early 1700s. France was in a high-stakes global power game against Spain and England, and Louisiana was their big play. On paper, it was magnificent, a massive territory stretching from the Gulf of Mexico all the way up the Mississippi Valley. It was supposed to be France's answer to the booming colonies of its rivals. But in reality, it was mostly swamp, mosquitoes, and rumors of silver mines that never panned out. The Grand Colonial Project was a disaster waiting to happen. The climate was brutal, plantations failed, investors panicked, and French officials watched their North American dream teeter on the edge of total collapse. The problem, as seen from Paris, was simple: not enough people. No respectable French citizen wanted to cross an ocean just to risk dying of malaria in a muddy, failing experiment. So the French crown got creative. If good, upstanding citizens wouldn't volunteer to build Louisiana, why not send the people who had no choice? Starting in the 1710s, the French government began a radical new strategy. Instead of letting criminals rot in a dungeon or be chained to a galley oar, they offered them a one-way ticket across the Atlantic. Forgery, theft, desertion, even just being poor and homeless, suddenly, these weren't just crimes to be punished, but qualifications for forced colonial settlement. From the perspective of the French crown, it was a brilliant two-for-one deal. They could empty their overflowing prisons and simultaneously populate their struggling colony. They were transforming, in their eyes, useless mouths into useful labor. Of course, for the few people already living in Louisiana, it was a social experiment fueled by chaos. Imagine watching ships arrive, not with skilled artisans and families, but with boatloads of convicts dumped on your doorstep. But these men weren't the only ones being shipped off. France had another problem it wanted to solve: women. In cities like Paris, poverty and social upheaval had pushed countless women into desperate situations. Some were involved in sex work, others were accused of vagrancy, and many were simply women living without the protection of a father or husband, which made them a threat to the rigid social order. To the authorities, they weren't individuals with stories of hardship. They were a moral stain, a problem to be exported. And so France began rounding them up. Women, some convicted of crimes, others simply deemed unwanted, were herded onto ships like livestock. They were promised new lives and husbands waiting for them in Louisiana. These women were essentially state-sponsored mail-order brides, sent to stabilize the colony, produce children, and tie the restless male population to the land. The journey was brutal, and what they found on the other side was nothing like the promises they were given. When they stepped onto the shores of the Gulf Coast, the reality was a brutal shock. Early New Orleans wasn't the romantic city of iron balconies and jazz we picture today. It was a muddy, half-built outpost carved out of a swamp. Wooden shacks leaned at odd angles. Streets turned to muck after every rain, and the line between the settlement and the wild, dangerous wilderness was just a few soggy steps away. And the men waiting for them? They weren't polished gentlemen. They were soldiers, adventurers, and fellow convicts, rough men who had survived the same brutal conditions. In this environment, survival trumped everything else. The official labels from back in France, criminal, prostitute, vagrant, started to lose their meaning. What mattered was who could endure, who could make a life in this unforgiving place. Many of these women, written off as moral failures by Parisian society, proved to be incredibly resilient. They became the backbone of the colony. They ran households, managed small businesses, and navigated a world of violent men and deadly diseases. They raised children who would grow up to call themselves Creoles, their identities forged in the new world, not defined by the labels of the old. The same was true for the men. Sure, some remained violent criminals. The colonial records are filled with stories of brawls, theft, and worse. But many others saw a chance to reinvent themselves. A pickpocket from Paris could become a carpenter in New Orleans. A runaway soldier could become a skilled navigator on the Mississippi. They became farmers, sailors, translators, and guides, all roles the colony desperately needed to simply function. When we say Louisiana was built by these outcasts, it's not just to be provocative, it's the literal truth. The people that French society threw away did the dirty, dangerous, daily work of keeping the colony alive. Of course, they weren't the only ones building Louisiana. We have to acknowledge the immense and brutal role of enslaved Africans, whose forced labor built the plantations and cities, and whose cultural contributions are immeasurable. We also have to recognize the native nations who were there long before the French, and who shaped the colony's trade, diplomacy, and very survival. But what makes Louisiana's origin story so unique is how openly its European population was stocked with people that other colonies tried to hide or exclude. Other American colonies built their founding myths on piety, freedom, and rugged individualism. Louisiana's story reads more like a desperate kingdom's damage control. This tension between the polished image and the gritty reality still defines Louisiana today. Tourist brochures sell you romance and decadence, a land of masquerade balls and charming courtyards. History books often skip right over this messy period, jumping from the French flag to the Louisiana Purchase as if the people in between were just background noise. But they weren't. Their legacy is everywhere. When you walk through the French Quarter or hear a unique Creole dialect, or taste a dish that blends European, African, and Native American flavors into something completely new, you are experiencing the echoes of those supposedly disposable lives. Louisiana wasn't tamed by saints or settled by idealists. It was improvised into existence by people living on the edge of society, often on the wrong side of the law. Their choices, their alliances, and their sheer, stubborn will to survive turned a failing imperial project into one of the most unique and vibrant cultures in the world. So the next time you think of Louisiana, remember the ships. Remember the prisoners and the unwanted women, stepping into the suffocating heat with nothing but risk ahead of them. They were never meant to be heroes. But without their forced journeys and their defiant survival, the map, the culture, and the soul of America would look completely different today. Thanks for watching. If you found this story as fascinating as I do, be sure to subscribe for more hidden histories.